Good morning and welcome to August OCPL's genealogy group from Aachen to Zwingenberg, Finding Your German Ancestors. I'm Kate Kisselstein, the junior librarian here at OCPL's Local History and Genealogy Department. Please note that today's session is being recorded and a link will be sent out to participants next week. Sorry. As always, I'll leave time for questions at the end. Due to the number of registrants, however, I will be unable to monitor the chat very well. So please put a capital Q and a colon before any questions you put in the chat, and I'll try and make sure to get to those at the end. There we go. Okay. We're going to start off today's program by reviewing the major time periods of Germany's history, followed by a closer look at key events and locations in German's history that could affect your research. Note that as we're talking about locating your German ancestors, there are going to be quite a few maps today. Next, before we delve into the case study, we'll go over some common genealogical terms that you may run across during your research, particularly if you have 18th and 19th century ancestors. Then, given that there is no centralized repository for genealogical purposes in Germany, we'll go over the different archives you may need to consult during your search. And then lastly, I'll take you through a short case study that highlights some useful websites, one of which is actually a collection that's housed on Family Search. This timeline starts so far back due to the longevity of the First German Reich. We start with Charlemagne, who was made Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire of France and Germany in 800 AD. Upon his death 43 years later, the Carolingian Empire is split amongst his heirs, with a large portion being named the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, creating the First German Reich. This Reich would continue for 963 years until Europe is reorganized by Napoleonic design. From 1806 to 1871, the borders of the small kingdoms and principalities that make up the German nation are in flux. It isn't until Otto von Bismarck unifies them that the nation of Germany is established as the Second German Reich, and this Reich continues until Germany is defeated in World War I. After World War I, Germany was ruled by the Weimar Republic, which was faced with the crippling reparations required following Germany's loss of World War I. The resulting economic downturn proved devastating and paved the way for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party to take power in 1934 and establish the Third German Reich. The Third Reich continued until Germany and the Axis powers lose World War II. Post-World War II, Germany and Berlin are divided between the US, France, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The portion under Soviet control becomes East Germany, or the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, and East Berlin, while the remaining portions become West Germany, or the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, and West Berlin. To further demarcate the borders between West and East Berlin, a wall is erected in 1961. It remains in place for roughly 28 years. The beginning of its demolition in November 1989 helps pave the way for the official reunification of Germany as the Bundesrepublik Deutschland in October 1990. 7 years after the start of the Protestant Reformation, on October 31st, 1517, Protestant churches begin keeping records. It will be 39 years before Catholic priests are ordered to do the same. Unfortunately, many records are subsequently burned during the 30 Years' War. Further changes occur with that war's end as many borders are shifted. In the late 17th century, a group of German immigrants, mostly Mennonites seeking religious freedom, sailed to Pennsylvania and purchased land near Philadelphia, founding the first German settlement in the United States. And this is what I was told is the official name of this map, which is the mess that was Germany in the 1700s. In 1709, a large number of Palatine Germans emigrate from the Pfalz region and head to England and America. 13 years later, emigration from Germany resumes as Austro-Hungarian monarchs begin inviting Germans to settle in parts of their empire. The exodus of Germans continues in 1763 with Catherine the Great's invitation for them to settle in Russia. On August 5th, 1772, borders change as Prussia annexes the territory of West Prussia from Poland. 20 years later, there is an interruption in the keeping of church records owing to France starting civil registration requirements west of the Rhine River. And I told you this was a mess. The second partition of Poland occurs on January of 1793 when Prussia annexes Posen and parts to the east. 2 years later, Napoleon begins to conquer most of Europe, and civil registration is introduced in the parts of Germany held by France. At this time, Jews are treated as citizens and encouraged to adopt fixed surnames, as prior to this, Hebrew patronymic surnames were the norm. Later, in October of 1795, Prussia annexes most of the rest of today's Poland. This third partition of Poland includes Warsaw, Białystok, and parts of Lithuania. In August of 1806, Europe reorganizes under Napoleonic design, ending the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. It is replaced by the Austrian Empire and various kingdoms and principalities across Germany. Just 2 months later, Prussia is defeated and loses almost all of the territories gained from the 3 partitions of Poland. 6 years later, Prussia emancipates its Jews in the hopes that by doing so, they might educate the Gentiles and terminate laws that sought to oppress them. Fixed surnames are now mandatory, however, and vital records are kept by local governments. 2 years later, Napoleon weakens and the German states begin to reorganize under the leadership of Prussia. The Congress of Vienna, which occurred from 1814 to 1815, reorganized Europe after the Napoleonic Wars and effectively set Europe's national boundaries for the next century. 18 years later, Prussia would offer citizenship to some of the Jews living in the Posen region of Poland. At that time, Jews made up about 11% of the population of that region. The German revolutions of 1848 to 1849 were initially part of the revolutions of 1848 that broke out in many European countries. They were a series of loosely coordinated protests and rebellions in the states of the German Confederation, including the Austrian Empire. The revolutions, which stressed pan-Germanism, demonstrated popular discontent with the traditional, largely autocratic political structure of the 39 independent states of the Confederation that inherited the German territory of the former Holy Roman Empire after its dismantlement as a result of the Napoleonic Wars. The groundwork of the 1848 uprising was laid as early as the Hambacher Fest of 1832, when public unrest began to grow in the face of heavy taxation and political censorship. In the end, the 1848 revolutions turned out to be unsuccessful. King Frederick Wilhelm IV of Prussia refused the imperial crown. The Frankfurt Parliament was dissolved. The ruling princes repressed the risings by military force, and the German Confederation was reestablished in 1850. Also in 1850, Hamburg passenger lists started being kept, and local history and genealogy department holds several titles related to these lists. However, the lists from January to June of 1853 are missing. There are also no lists for the World War I years of 1915 to 1919. Note that while Ancestry provides access to the digitized version, it's in German and you would need to use German spellings for your search. These lists are an essential source for helping to better pinpoint which region your ancestor came from. In October of 1864, after 8 months of fighting, Prussia conquers the Danish territory of Schleswig-Holstein. 2 years later, Prussia is at war with Austria, a war also known as the 7 Weeks' War. The major result of the war was a shift in power among the German states away from Austrian and towards Prussian hegemony. It resulted in the abolition of the German Confederation and its partial replacement by the unification of all the northern German states into the North German Confederation that excluded Austria and the other southern German states. Kleindeutsches Reich. The war also resulted in the Italian annexation of the Austrian province of Venetia. Oh, I just went back. There we go. So the third act of German unification was the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, orchestrated by Otto von Bismarck to draw the Western German states into alliance with the North German Confederation. With the French defeat, the German Empire was proclaimed in January of 1871 in the palace at Versailles, France. While the empire was proclaimed in January 1871, the Franco-Prussian War doesn't officially end until May, and the French regions of Alsace and part of Lorraine come under German rule. 3 years later, Prussia introduces civil registration, and by 1876, the rest of the German Empire follows suit. World War I begins on the 28th of July, 1914, and lasts until November 11th, 1918. In America, this caused many German American immigrants to stop celebrating German holidays and even stop speaking German. There was actually a law in Iowa at the time that only English could be spoken, which was a hardship for other immigrant families as well. Many German American business owners even changed their business names to something more American sounding. As Europe was ravaged by fighting, German immigrants in the US suffered harassment, internment, lynchings, and even the humiliation of being tarred and feathered. Following the devastation of the First World War, Germany was exhausted and sued for peace in desperate circumstances. Awareness of imminent defeat sparked a revolution, the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, formal surrender to the Allies, and the proclamation of the Weimar Republic on November 9, 1918. This proclamation also led to the official end of serfdom and feudalism in Germany. The Treaty of Versailles was a peace treaty signed on June 28, 1919. As the most important treaty of World War I, it ended the state of war between Germany and most of the Allied powers. It was signed in the Palace of Versailles exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which led to the war. The other Central Powers on the German side signed separate treaties. The United States never ratified the Versailles Treaty and made a separate peace treaty with Germany. Although the armistice of November 11, 1918 ended the actual fighting, it took 6 months of Allied negotiations at the Paris Peace Conference to conclude the peace treaty. Germany was not allowed to participate in the negotiations. It was simply forced to sign the final result. A part of that was that Germany had to return control of Alsace and Lorraine to France. But the biggest hit to Germany was being required to pay $31 billion in reparations. In addition to those reparations, Germany would suffer further economic woes during the Depression of 1932, when over 3 million Germans found themselves out of work. The hardships caused by this would pave the way for Adolf Hitler to be appointed chancellor with his promises of a stronger, brighter Germany. When Germany's Nazi Party came to power in 1933, it triggered a significant exodus of artists, scholars, and scientists as Germans and other Europeans fled the coming storm. Most eminent among this group was the pacifist Jewish scientist named Albert Einstein. In August of the following year, German President Hindenburg dies, and Hitler takes over under the new title of Führer, creating the Third Reich. In 1935, the Nuremberg race laws deprived German Jews of their citizenship. There were two main laws passed: the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. The Nazi Party had always promised that if they came to power, only racially pure Germans would be allowed to hold German citizenship. The Reich Citizenship Law made this a reality. This law defined a citizen as a person who is of, quote, of German blood or related blood, unquote. This meant that Jews, defined as a separate race, could not be full citizens of Germany. They had no political rights. In addition, the law for the protection of German blood and German honor was a law against what the Nazis viewed as race mixing or, quote, race defilement, unquote. It banned future intermarriages and sexual relations between Jews and people of German or related blood. The Nazis believed that such relationships were dangerous because they led to mixed race children. According to the Nazis, these children and their descendants undermined the purity of the German race. Nearly 3 years later, Hitler calls for a nationwide census. This German minority census of 1938 to 39 predominantly focuses on Jews and other minorities and included race-specific questions which provided the raw material for Nazi race-based policies. The census, in German Volkszählung, was conducted in Germany, including annexed Austria and the so-called Sudetenland of the occupied Czech Republic, and it required the head of each household to fill out a supplementary card, or Ergänzungskarte, which mandated marking the Jewish background of each of the residents' 4 grandparents. By 1942, the cards of households with one or more residents with a Jewish grandparent marked on their card, the so-called minority census, were collected and sent to the Reich Genealogy Office, or Reichssippenamt, then located in a building seized from the Berlin Jewish community, where the cards most likely survived through the end of the war. By the 1980s, the cards were in the custody of the state archives of the communist government in East Germany, and in the 1990s, the cards were in the custody of the German Federal Archives. It was discovered that the cards are about 87% complete, lacking only for Thüringen, the Rhine province, the districts of Erfurt and Minden, and several districts of Bavaria. Many of the districts included are areas that are now part of Poland, such as Silesia, Pomerania, and East Brandenburg, and Russia, namely East Prussia and Kaliningrad. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland, triggering the start of World War II. Over 11 million people of all ages, roughly 6 million Jews, but also large numbers of Romani, Slavs, and other races, the disabled, homosexuals, and religious dissenters, die as the Nazis implement an extermination policy in the death camps of Eastern Europe. Thousands more left Germany to find safe havens elsewhere, including after Germany's unconditional surrender to the Allied forces on May 8, 1945. After the war, the Allied powers, United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, came together to form the International Military Tribunal. From 1945 to 1946, Nazi Germany leaders stood trial for crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit any of the foregoing crimes. 3 years after the end of those trials, Germany is divided into 4 zones, with the Soviet-controlled region becoming East Germany and the British, American, and French regions becoming West Germany. As the 1950s sees the start of rapid economic growth in West Germany, many citizens leave East Germany. This steady flight of people from east to west is halted by the construction of the Berlin Wall on August 12, 1961. 28 years later, the peaceful revolution, in German Friedliche Revolution, leads to the opening of East Germany's borders with the West. This revolution, as a part of the revolutions of 1989, was the process of socio-political change that led to the opening of East Germany's borders with the West, the end of the ruling of the Socialist Union Party of Germany in the German Democratic Republic in 1989, and the transition to a parliamentary democracy, which later enabled the reunification of Germany in October of 1990. This happened through nonviolent initiatives and demonstrations. This period of change is referred to in German as Die Wende, German, or the turning point. 2 months after the border opens, the Berlin Wall is torn down, leading to a mass exodus of Germans seeking the better financial prospects of the West. And roughly 11 months later, West and East Germany are again united as the Federal Republic of Germany. Today, the Federal Republic of Germany comprises 16 constituent states, which are collectively referred to as Länder. Each state has its own constitution and is largely autonomous in regard to its internal organization. As of 2017, Germany is divided into 401 districts or Kreise at the municipal level, and these consist of 294 rural districts and 107 urban districts. And before we delve into looking at records, it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with some of the terms you may encounter. The word lists on this slide and the next one come courtesy of the Family Search Research Wiki. They have a lot more information on months, days of the week, occupations, and such, so I've included a link to the relevant page on your handout. But I wanted to give you a look at some of the common words you might see. One of the ones we'll see is gestorben, and on the next page, I've highlighted the word Gatten, which was one that was unfamiliar to me, and I studied German in high school, and so that I wanted to point that out because we'll be seeing it later on. So here are some of the German archives we may come across. The Bundesarchiv, or German Federal Archives, does contain a large number of documents related to people. These documents can help clarify service periods and nationalities. That said, unlike some countries, the Bundesarchiv is not a central repository for what they term person-related documents, as it isn't possible to conduct a simple name search across the entire holdings. The documents are generally not indexed by name, even if they often contain personal references. So when searching for your German ancestors, you truly do have to try and locate where they lived first before consulting an archives. Owing to the changing of borders that we saw, 2 other national archives worth mentioning are the Österreichisches Staatsarchiv, or Austrian National Archives, and the Schweizerisches Bundesarchiv, or Swiss National Archives. And I've provided links to those in your handout as well. The next kind you may come across are the Standesamt or Kirchenarchiv. Standesamt is a civil registry office, and the Kirchenarchiv would be a parish office. The civil or ecclesiastical registers of birth, marriages, and deaths are, generally speaking, located in these offices. Then we have the Staatsarchiv, or municipal archives, and the Staatsarchiv, which is the public record office or archive. In general, it is advisable to start researching ancestors at the municipal archives or public records offices of those regions, which seem likely to be relevant due to their proximity to the birthplace or place of residence of the person you are looking for. So, given that you need to figure out just where your ancestor came from before you can dig through records, where can you turn? One website is compgen.de, also known as genealogy.net, which is Germany's largest association for family research. While the site is in German, if you use either Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome and possibly other browsers, the browser will translate the site for you. Just keep in mind that you'll want to switch back to German when it comes to viewing the results, as even surnames can get translated. There was one example that the actual surname was the name Fröhlich, and it got translated as happy. So you can see why you might want to double check that. So with the help of the interactive name distribution map or Namenverbreitungskarte, it is possible to show where a particular surname occurs particularly frequently. So this can help you narrow down your search. It is based on these two sources, the German casualty lists of the First World War and a phone book from 1996. For each surname appearing in the list of casualties of the First World War, the georeferenced hometowns of the soldiers are located on a map of the German Reich from 1914. Calculations show that the median date of birth of soldiers is 1890, hence the first date for name distribution. This can be compared with the distribution of surnames based on the telephone directory data from 1996. The name distribution map illustrates the considerable shifts, which are mainly a result of the Second World War. The name distribution map search interface defaults to searching for the surname in 1890, but it's easy enough to toggle to the 1996 results. You can enter several surnames if you'd like to see where they overlap, for example. For this example, I started with my surname as it is currently spelled, and then also searched for the most common variant that I found in my genealogical research. Here are the results for the surnames Kisselstein and Kieselstein. I know it's a little hard to see the colored dots, so I've circled the areas with the most results. And it's important to note that you can zoom in on the map and move around to get a better view of your results. Given what I've been able to uncover about my Kisselstein ancestors, namely the fact that my second time's great-grandfather was born around 1827 in Baden-Württemberg, which is the bottom circle here. It's surprising to see the number of hits in the region of Saxony and North Rhine-Westphalia. Nonetheless, these results will come in handy, as I've had trouble finding records in Germany for him. Of course, it also doesn't help that on all of his US records, he's listed as John Henry Kisselstein. He could be Johann Heinrich, Johannes Heinrich, or even Johannes Enricus. I've seen some Latin for him, or seen some Latin records. Now that I've found some other regions to explore, I can take that information to CompGen's databases. These can be searched individually, or you can use their meta search option. The first database is Adressbücher, or address books and directories. This database contains historical address books, population registers, citizen books, and others. In addition to the pure name and address data, often information on occupation, marital status, home ownership, and companies that are owned, and more can be found. The second one is Familienanzeigen, or family announcements or ads. This database contains birth, marriage, and death announcements dating from the 18th century, as well as advertisements of engagements, confirmations, anniversaries, and others that have been published in the press. Such advertisements are systematically recorded and evaluated here. For the present, only obituaries for historical, but for historical newspapers, there may be even more. The third is the genealogische Datenbasis, or genealogical database, or GEDBAS. It is a database of linked genealogical data, which includes ancestral lists and family trees. The project is also intended to help researchers find contacts with other interested parties and exchange results. The fourth one is Grabsteine, or gravestones. This database contains documentation of cemeteries and gravestones, and the inscriptions can be searched by surname and cemetery location in the database and are presented with the respective photos. And one interesting thing to note about that I discovered about gravestones is that currently in Germany, you rent your grave plot for 30 years. After 30 years have passed, they actually dig up the remains, place them in a mass grave, and the stones are then given to the surviving family. The only exception would be if you were somebody famous like a Beethoven or a Mozart. So that was something interesting that I learned recently. So the fifth database is Online Ortsfamilienbücher, or online local family books. A local family book is a secondary source of personal history in which the entire population of a place that can be recorded in the sources, usually church books, is listed with their life dates and usually the direct genealogical connections as well as other information. Sorted by family name, you can find individual persons, mother-child connections, and above all, entire nuclear families, parents and their children. In most printed books and in all of the online ones, reference numbers are given to the families of origin and marriage so that the entire kinship network can be determined from one book as far as it is limited to the place examined. The primary sources used for the processing of a local family book are usually the church books, from which at least the entries on baptism, marriage, and funeral are transferred. Often also information on godparents and witnesses. However, all other primary sources of personal history of spiritual or secular origin can also be used to edit a local family book, as well as secondary sources that have already been published, such as other local family books from neighboring communities. The sixth is Geschichtliches Ortsverzeichnis, GOV, or Historical Place Register. Identifying places is essential in family history research. Often only incomplete local information or information on long-gone territorial structures is available. This complicates the identification of responsible archives, among other things. The database documents name variants, time-related information, changing affiliations, to administrative units and churches. And the seventh one is Verlustlisten, or list of losses. This database is a recording of the German and Austro-Hungarian casualty lists of World War I. The final icon here that states Mach mit will take you to a page where you can volunteer to help. And while you can opt to have your browser translate the site into English, CompGen does offer the option of changing the language for your meta search. It's under Funktionen, and then you click on Sprache wählen. And CompGen currently offers the option of choosing between German, English, French, or Russian. As I'm just getting started, I opt for CompGen's meta search option in the hopes that I might find something for a John or Johann Henry or Heinrich Kisselstein, who was born around 1827 in Baden-Württemberg. That said, as I want to maximize my results, I only enter the surname as it's currently spelled and leave the place name blank. As you can see, I get several hits. I do get several hits, including ones for females who were born with the surname Kisselstein, as we can see with Josefa here, Haubengeborene Kisselstein. By scrolling down, while I don't find any entries for a Johann Heinrich Kisselstein, I do find one for a Johann Theodor, whose dates could possibly make him a relative of my 2 times great-grandfather. My surname is not very common, so the likelihood of this being true is greater than it might be for others. And here's the result of clicking on that link. Note that while I had selected English as the language for my meta search, these results are in German, geboren an, gestorben an. And there's Verwandtschaftsgrad is Gatten. That's the word for wife that we saw. So in this case, you'll need to allow your browser to do the translating for you. The image on the right is of the original death notice that appeared in Düsseldorf. Note that it is printed in what is known as Fraktur script, which was used in Germany from the 16th to the 20th centuries. In viewing the English language results, we can see that Johann Theodor Kisselstein was born on June 29th, 1783, and died on July 15th, 1853. He left behind his wife, Maria Anna, whose maiden name was de Grec, and an unnamed son. While this record has quite a bit of information, we'll go elsewhere to see if there's more to uncover. One such source is the International Genealogical Index that can be accessed on Family Search. There we go. This is the main page for the International Genealogical Index collection located on Family Search. It contains millions of records of individuals who lived between 1500 and 1900, primarily in the United States, Canada, Latin America, and Europe. Ongoing efforts are made to compile genealogical data from other regions and peoples, so it's growing all the time. We're conducting a search for Johann Theodor Kieselstein, but I only enter the year of his birth. While I could enter Düsseldorf, I want to maximize the results in the hopes of getting as many hits as possible. Plus, I don't know if he always lived there. There are 101 results, and now we can see from the first result that the unnamed son was most likely Karl Edmund Kieselstein. We also see that Johann Theodor married Marie Anne de Grec in 1827. Here's the result for Johann Theodor Kieselstein in the birth record for Karl Edmund Kieselstein. It shows that this happened on January 2nd, 1829 in Düsseldorf-Stadt, Rhineland, Prussia. We are also notified that there are similar records for Johann Theodor Kieselstein, one of the common variants I've seen of my surname. But more importantly, this record shows that it's attached to a family tree. So we'll look at Johann Theodor's family tree profile record next. And here's the profile. But note that Family Search is the only one who has added anything to this record, so it's unlikely that he's been claimed yet. And the last change was done in 2012. Family Search has also kindly let us know that there may be a duplicate person in their records. In this case, it's based off the marriage record from our search results, where the surname is spelled Kieselstein, and this will instead of Kieselstein, but as we saw, the wife was the same, so this is most likely a duplicate. So one thing we can do is view the source that led to the entry of the birth record first. We see that the birth record came from Germany Births and Baptisms 1558 to 1898, and it was entered by Family Search in 2014. That's not the only thing we can do on this page, however. And I realize that some of you may already be familiar with this option in Family Search, but seeing as we're on a sources page for Johann Theodor, we do have the option to add a source. This is one of the things I like being able to do when using Family Search, once I've double checked the sources, that is. In this case, this is where we can add the Totenzettel record that we found through CompGen's website. When you add a source, you'll need to be sure you've gathered all your information. In this case, as the original website record didn't provide a citation, I had to draft the source citation myself. The proper citation for genealogical records is called Evidence Explained, and the main website is listed in the handout. As this presentation is about German genealogy, however, I won't go into detail on how to create this citation, but if you email me, I'll be happy to help out. Anyway, once you've entered the information, including a note as to why this information is correct, you just hit save. And the reason this information is correct that has been added is that his name and his wife's name are a match. While the added source is added right away to allow you to fill in the relevant details for your ancestor, it does get reviewed by Family Search to ensure that it's reliable information. Now here is Johann Theodor Kieselstein's record with his birth and death dates added. As you can see, not only does it provide the dates, it also provides the reason for the change and the date and name of the account holder who changed it. And I happen to do this while on one of our departmental computers, which is why it says Central Library. Now, given that we were provided with a digitized copy of Johann Theodor's death notice, and I know this event happened in Düsseldorf, I wouldn't necessarily have to do more digging overseas. But what if the digitized image hadn't been available and I wanted to get a copy, or I simply wanted to see if I could find more records for him? I'd need to be able to find out where the archives are located, which leads me to our final third website, not final website. This is a great resource. It can help narrow down locations for your overseas search. It's the online version of the Myers Gazetteer, or simply Myers Gaz. The full name of the print version was Meyers Orts- und Verkehrslektion des Deutschen Reichs. This was the most important of all German gazetteers. The goal of the Meyers compilers was to list every place name in the German Empire from 1871 to 1918. It gives the location, that is the state and other jurisdictions, where the civil registry office was, and parishes if that town had them. It also gives lots of other information about each place. The only drawback to Meyers is that if a town did not have a parish, it does not tell where the parish was, making reference to other works necessary. And I start with a search for Düsseldorf, the town where Johann Theodor Kieselstein was living at the time of his death. Note that you do not need to use diacritic or accent marks, and that the search is not case sensitive. There are 18 results from plain old Düsseldorf to Düsseldorf-Westen, but they're all in the Rhineland region. So we'll look at the first one as it is marked HPST for Hauptstadt, or capital city. This is what you'll see when initially clicking on the first result. On the left is the entry as it appeared in the original Meyers Gazetteer, along with the details of which volume and page the entry is located in. The list below the volume and page number will provide you with many details about the place you're viewing. Not only will it show which city or municipal archives you should contact, but it will also tell you the type and number of religious establishments located there. The four main types are Evangelische Pfarrkirche, or Protestant parish church, Katholische Kirche, Catholic church, Synagogue, which is synagogue, and if there were churches that were not Protestant or Catholic, or a synagogue. And while it's not clear what denomination this last type includes, it's possible that Mennonite churches would fall under this heading. For the purposes of our search, however, we're mainly interested in the fact that we'd have to consult the Standesamt in Düsseldorf Mitte, which is where the central civil registration office is located. But there's more information if you scroll down the page. And when you scroll to the bottom, there's additional information, including any corrections that appeared in the addendum to the original Meyers Gazetteer, and a map that, when you click on it, allows you to view the historical version of that area, which allows you to zoom in for additional details. And then, so given that I know that I have to contact the Standesamt Düsseldorf, I'll admit I checked my usual suspects, Cindy's List and Family Search, just before I just used Google to find the website for Standesamt Düsseldorf, and using the Google Translate option to translate the site into English. Note that there are time limits on the documents they can provide, with proof of death being limited to the past 30 years, which would be well after Johann Theodor Kieselstein passed away. But they do provide a link to where you can find older documents, the Staatsarchiv Düsseldorf. And the Staatsarchiv Düsseldorf has a genealogical research page that lists the records they have access to, not just birth, marriage, death, but also church registers, an 1844 address book, which may contain a listing for Johann and Maria Kieselstein, the death notices collection, and a Bürgerrolle for the period from 1854 to 1864. This office will be the actual place I can contact to find more records for Johann Theodor Kieselstein and his family. And while it'll be easy enough to email them my request, I may still want to pay them a visit to see what else can be found in person. And here are some of the upcoming events that we've got coming. The next month, we are going to be talking with a New York State town historian. And in the interest of disclosure, yes, you'll be talking with my mother, who is also a local history librarian. And that said, are there any questions?